Welcome everyone to Spiritual Dimensions of Music, Meaning, Interpretation, and Culture, a live virtual event co-sponsored by Seton Hall's Institute for Communication and Religion and the Center for Catholic Studies. This evening, scholars and artists have come together for an open and insightful conversation about secular music, how organized religion has reacted to it, and the sometimes overlooked spiritual aspects to secular music. Our session will probe several key questions, including how does secular art achieve spiritual significance and meaning? How does music articulate and perform spirituality? And what is the relationship between religious traditions and popular cultures? For our opening, I'm happy to ask the ICR's founding director, Monsignor Dennis Mann, to say a prayer for us. Monsignor Mann?
Thank you, John. Welcome and good evening, all. Inscribed on the wall of an opera house in Germany are these words: Bach gave us God's word. Mozart gave us God's laughter. Beethoven gave us God's fire. God gave us music so that we might pray without words. Inscribed on a sign outside New Hope Baptist Church in Newark, New Jersey, are the words, Dr. Sissy Houston, choirmaster, 200-voice youth gospel choir. Johann Sebastian Bach's family was filled with musicians, his sons, Karl Emanuel, Johann Christian, Wilhelm Friedman, and Johann Friedrich. Emily Drinkard Houston, Sissy Houston's family, was filled with musicians. Daughter Whitney, nieces Dion and Dee Dee Warwick, cousin Leontine Price. The beauty of music, the beauty of faith, the beauty of family. Let us pray for musicians, that the beauty which they create in song and praise may always echo in our hearts. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Monsignor Mann. Our program tonight will have three parts. First, each person on our panel will speak on our theme for about 7 or 8 minutes. Next, panelists will respond to one another, and then we'll close with an audience Q&A session. So, without further ado, our first speaker is Dr. Greg Floyd. Dr. Floyd is the director of the Center for Catholic Studies, and he teaches in the core program. He specializes in 19th and 20th century European philosophy, in particular the history and methodology of phenomenology, hermeneutics, and the philosophy of religion. He's co-editor of and contributing author to The Catholic Reception of Continental Philosophy in North America, and his recent publications include The Sense of Phenomenology in Crossing, the INPR Journal, and Critical Realism, Facticity, and Psychic Conversion in Intellect, Affect, and God, the Trinity, History, and the Life of Grace. Dr. Floyd is also a local cantor and accompanist in local churches. Dr. Floyd, can you please speak on our theme for tonight?
Thank you very much, John. Good evening, everyone. It's great to be with you this afternoon. I want to begin by thanking Dr. Radovan for organizing a discussion on a very important topic, a topic I think that touches each of us in some way, whether we're a musician or just a fan. I'd like to begin by just saying that both the philosophical and theological traditions, the ones I'll be focusing on today for a few minutes here, in particular the ones that make up what we sometimes call Western culture, these are both in unanimous agreement that music has a spiritual dimension. In fact, they both agree adamantly on what we might call the spiritual potency of music, and that this, despite what we might think, is its primary dimension. that while we can distinguish other parts of a musical experience like rhythm and pitch, tone, or melody, these are all in some essential sense subordinate or secondary elements enlisted in the overall attempt of music to move us. And as I was preparing my brief comments today, I was reminded, or when I was wrapping up my graduate studies in Boston, I was offering a summer course, and it was open to students beyond the university I was teaching in. And I had a number of students from the New England Conservatory of Music, one of the two great schools in Boston alongside Berkeley. And I had a world-class cellist in class that summer, Alexander Monti. He had finished all his coursework, was hoping to return to Europe to begin a career as a professional cellist, and had 2 philosophy credits left. So he found himself in my summer course. And we were discussing art and music at one point. That was not the focus of the course. It just happened to come up in conversation. And he said something I'll never forget. He said, you know, the goal, or he said himself, as he understood his own purpose as a musician, he said, was to make people feel things through tiny vibrations of air. That as a cellist, his goal was to make people feel things through tiny vibrations of air. And what I'd like us to think about as we open this panel very briefly for a few minutes here is that question: why does music make us feel things? And so in 5 minutes, I'd like to make 3 points. One from ancient Greece, a second one from contemporary Christianity, and a final one, I hope, rooted in the universal human experience of music and art more generally. And so I hope that those insights can perhaps guide our discussion for today. So number one, ancient Greece. An early and especially influential reflection on not just art, but music in particular occurs in the philosopher Plato's dialogue, The Republic. Here, Plato's famous character, Socrates, I'm sure we're all familiar with him, is engaged in discussion with 2 young men over how to create a just city, a city characterized by justice in its relations. And the 3 of them together determine that education is one of the keys to justice, that we have to educate citizens in a certain way so that they desire justice and enact it in their relationships with one another. And a key aspect of that education is music. In fact, for Plato, basic education has 2 components: music and what he calls gymnastics, or we could think of as physical exercise. And this is a direct quote from way back in ancient Greece, that we need gymnastics or exercise for the body, and we need music to educate the soul. So we see here that from the very beginning of the philosophical tradition in the Western world, a reflection on the meaning and nature of music. And that from that very beginning, music is understood to be something that is closely related to one's spiritual center. And I'll just point out what I hope is obvious. We're not talking yet about particularly religious music or sacred music, right? Important categories of music, but just music in general, that music itself, in whatever form it appears, has something to do with and is somehow bound up with our inner selves, our sort of the deepest seats of our identity. So, and maybe in this respect, it's worth noting that our English word music comes from the Greek word musike, that originally means any activity that's performed under the influence of the Muses, right? These sort of godlike figures who would sort of take possession of authors and composers and sort of direct their talents. So this sense that music is wrapped up with spiritual identity is present from the very beginning. But we can, of course, ask, well, why is this the case? And a few pages later in this famous dialogue, we get an answer from Plato's dialogue partner, Glaucon, who writes, education in music is most important because rhythm and harmony most of all insinuate themselves into the inmost part of the human soul, vigorously laying hold of it and bringing grace with them. They make a person graceful, ... or the opposite, right, ungraceful. And Socrates goes on to say, we'll never then be musical in the full sense unless and until we recognize the virtues of moderation, courage, generosity, magnificence, and all their kin, and again, also their opposites. So this idea that musical training in this more capacious sense, this larger sense, is tied to a healthy soul for Socrates, that music has something to do in training us to be people of virtue, to be people disposed or oriented toward the world in ways that are good and generous. So I think, to summarize briefly, we can take three things away from Socrates' account. Number one, that music somehow reaches into the inner or spiritual core of a person. And it's distinct that music does that, or music at least does it in a way that's different from arguments and other kinds of things. Number two, and this is equally important, music is morally ambiguous, right? It's not automatically good or bad. It can be either in some ways, at least in its consequences. On the one hand, Socrates gives us this very exalted or lofty aspiration as musicians and consumers or people who participate in music, even just as hearers. The greatest achievement of music is to assist us in developing a beautiful soul, a beautiful life. The musical person is a sort of idol for Socrates, ideal. But it can also do great damage in creating discord rather than harmony in the soul. And finally, the third point, carefully evaluating music for Socrates is key because it communicates to people beneath the level of reason and argumentation. And I think that might sound kind of technical, but true of our own experience. Socrates' insight is that music speaks to us, whether of good things or bad things, at a very basic level, the level of sort of emotion and affect. It doesn't always need to give reasons or evidence, but rather, and this is the words we use when we speak about music, it stirs us, it inspires us, it moves us, it overwhelms us, it at times can overcome us, it washes over us. The metaphors we use suggest this dynamic that music, or as some of my students are fond of saying, we vibe with music, right? It sort of resonates with us at a level beneath often our own conscious thought and evaluation. All right, so that's the sort of very broadly one of the Greek perspectives on music, okay, that music in all its forms, religious music included, speaks to the soul, and for that reason, it ought to be something we think about. So I think that in a way at least licenses the discussion we're having today, right? Music is rich, it's profound, and yet it's curious and ambiguous in many ways and worthy of sort of piecing, taking apart. So what of the theological tradition, right? The other great sort of source or font of Western tradition, as we often refer to it. I'd like to take, again, very briefly in a very cursory way, just one perspective or angle of reflection from contemporary Christianity. Like other great religious traditions in the world, Christianity is very interested in and particularly attentive to the spiritual dimensions of music. But I want to start here with a clear distinction, because within theological thought, there are two ways of thinking about music that often get sort of run together. We can think about the specific question of the music we use in various forms of worship or liturgy, right? The context of, say, a religious service, a mass, something like that. And I'm going to defer to Gloria and Jason, who are going to speak about that a little later today. But I think Plato has taught us that given the nature of music, asking what kinds of music we should play, when and where is a very viable and real and important question. But the second way of thinking about music theologically that I'd like to focus on is the relevance of music just as such. What does the existence of this tremendous human capacity for creation and for the experience of beauty tell us about ourselves and about God? And so in the Second Vatican Council, which took place in the latter half of the 20th century, in the midst of a document that's focused on sacred music, we get the following statement that I think sums up the sort of Christian perspective on this nicely. The document states that the fine arts, right, music included, are rightly classed among the noblest activities of human genius. Of their nature, the arts are directed towards expressing in some way the infinite beauty of God in work made by human hands. Right, so let me say that one more again. The arts are directed toward expressing in some way the infinite beauty of God in work made by human hands. So this document suggests that theologically, or from a perspective of faith, any artist, to the degree that they're doing something beautiful and good with their art, is in some way participating in God's own creative work, right? So whether they're secular or sacred, excuse me, combining them, which maybe anticipates where we're going to go in this discussion, that there's something beautiful going on, right? So whether it's Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel or a Bach Requiem or something in between or something totally secular, right? This can be an expression of beauty and goodness that in some way, to pick the word deliberately, attunes us or orients us toward God. Okay, lastly then, because I know I'm running out of time, and here's where I'd really like to end, the experience of music. So rooting both the theological and philosophical perspectives in what I hope is a fairly universal human experience. And this final observation, I think, is in a way the most basic one and a point at which these two traditions converge. Music does something to us, and that observation is as mysterious as it is obvious, that we are moved by art, and perhaps above all arts by music, that we're in some more than merely metaphorical sense called out of ourselves and reminded that no matter how boring or distracted or pressured our daily lives may be, each of us harbors this capacity to be moved by beauty, to be moved by music that stirs us or calls us. And because of that capacity, that capacity in a strange way can be activated without our permission, right? Music can sometimes catch us off guards or unawares. And in a sense, you and I live exposed to beauty, whether we choose to be or not. In fact, it's an essential quality of beauty, take beautiful music as one example, that its force of attraction can arise in us without our consent, that in a way it colludes with our freedom beneath our own consciousness of their interaction. And commenting on this strange power of beauty to move us, the French philosopher Jean-Louis Chrétien writes that the manifestation of beauty comes to us as a call. It speaks to us in our exile, in our oblivion, in our distance. So to summarize, music reminds us that it is not only we who master the world, but sometimes the world is the thing that masters us. A healthy reminder that there's a world that calls out to us, at times reaching into our hearts and minds to wrest from them, to take out of them feelings and ideas and insights that we could not produce on our own if left to our own normal and distracted everyday obsessions. Chrétien reminds us and returns us to Plato by way of Christianity by suggesting that music, in speaking to our soul, reminds us of our freedom and perhaps of a goodness that transcends us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Floyd. I really appreciate that. And now we're going to turn to guest lecturer, Ray Menkeson. He's a professional musician and songwriter and former music executive. During his tenure in the record industry, Ray worked at independent and major record labels in radio. He worked with artists such as Kenny Wayne Shepherd, Steely Dan, MC Hammer, Clay Walker, and many others. In 2001, Ray designed a unique business model for an international music production and publishing company. He successfully raised private equity, managed investor relations, and served as company spokesman at major industry functions. Ray worked with top producers such as Nile Rodgers and Kevin Shirley to develop new artists and songwriters and place copyrights in films and soundtracks. Today, Ray is the creative spark, producer, and songwriter behind contemporary country artist Garden State Outlaws. Currently, Ray is completing graduate coursework in systematic theology at Immaculate Conception Seminary School of Theology. Ray, thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Radwan and Dr. Floyd, for being amazing. So now I have to do my thing. I tried to look at this when Dr. Radwan first talked to me about it from the artist perspective, or maybe even from the student perspective, because, you know, when I was 18 and I went on my first tour, we probably all felt the same as a lot of the students do now. Who hasn't had a melody or a rap verse or a guitar riff or something come into their mind? So as I was trying to do this thing, I probably wrote 10 essays and 2 PowerPoints, and I was struggling with it because I kept trying to fit the spiritual box into the non-secular worship tradition box. And as someone who loves heavy metal and hip hop and rap and country and, you know, taboo language in rap that speaks to the testimony of people who live differently than I do, is amazing to me, that mastery of language. So, you know, you get these little glimpses of spirit, and Friday morning, I'm panicking about this thing because I don't have anything written, and the news comes on, and the Broadway actor, I want to say it's Andre DeShields, I think his name is, from Hadestown. So they're discussing with him about Broadway opening up again and how exciting that's going to be. The city's preparing for it. And they asked him, you know, what do you think is going to be so special for people who can now come and see shows again? He says, well, the people who come, I'm paraphrasing, the people who come to see theater and music are the same people who go to church. They're looking for answers to questions. Okay, now I had a reason to look at this from a commonality as opposed to how does one see the other. So as a writer, as a songwriter, as a musician, I looked for it, and what happened was I came up with 3 things that I noticed happen all the time. The first of which is desire. So we have automatic desires. We're hungry, you want food. You're alone, you seek friends. You're here, you want to go there. But then there's other desire, the desire that inspires artists. If you're brokenhearted, you want love or you want to feel whole. If you're feeling stereotyped, you want equality. If you feel that you're being oppressed, you want justice. Those desires are incredibly powerful, and they are not easily satisfied. And I think if you're looking at spiritual music and you're looking at secular music, we're still talking about desire. It's either desire for communion with the Spirit, it's desire to feel closer to God, it's desire for something bigger than you, maybe an existential discussion that you're having an inner conversation with, or it's simply, I really wish we didn't break up and I can't get past this feeling. Because desire is not, in my opinion, so easily satisfied, the human person then looks for a way to create, a way to express, a way to soothe yourself, a way to come up with some medium so I can tell you how I feel, or where I'm from, or what matters to me. And maybe I think it matters to you too. This, to me, between desire and creation, have a common origin in the mind, in the spirit. But the third part of this, which I think is probably the most important to our discussion today, is what I'm calling intention. Now I've got this desire, and I have this reason to create something, music, words, poetry, with vibration, as Dr. Floyd talked about. But intention is where it gets tough. I can take Amazing Grace and I can do a rap song, or I can do a heavy metal version, or I can do a chorale. I can do a beautiful a cappella version. Intention is where that desire and that creation gets targeted. And it can become either judged or misunderstood, or somewhere on the sliding scale between virtue and vice, where we say, I don't like that taboo language in that rap song, or I don't know what they're so angry about in that heavy metal mosh pit. I don't go in mosh pits, I'm well beyond that. But that anger, that injustice, that expression still comes from the common place, in my opinion, where we find the desire to be unified with the Spirit, our own desire and creation. So to me, if we're talking about praying without words, all of those prayers include everything that's kind of going on in our inner conversations. And I think where intention gets interesting is if we're looking at music for what it is, something that inspires, something that moves, something that's evocative, and instead of judging it right away and saying, that's just not right, or that's, I don't get that, or whatever, we can work backwards from intention, backwards through creation, backwards to desire, and find that everything has a common origin. And I think for me, that's how I was able to finally summarily put all of this music that I think is so wonderful into the same box that desires to worship God. I thank you for the time.
Thank you so much for that beautiful closing, Ray. I can't wait till we get to our Q&A session. Our next guest is Alan Paul. Alan is a musician and New York Times best-selling author. His last 2 books, Texas Flood, The Inside Story of Stevie Ray Vaughan, and One Way Out, The Inside History of the Allman Brothers Band, debuted in the New York Times nonfiction hardcover bestsellers list. His first book, Big in China, My Unlikely Adventures Raising a Family, Playing the Blues, and Becoming a Star in Beijing, is about his experience raising a family in Beijing and forming a band with 3 Chinese musicians and touring China. Texas Flood is the first biography to feature cooperation of Vaughn's brother Jimmy and his Double Trouble bandmates. Paul interviewed almost 100 people for One Way Out, including all surviving band members and many friends and associates, including Eric Clapton. Big in China was optioned for film by Ivan Reitman's Montecito Productions and hailed by USA Today as a big-hearted memoir with emotional depth. Alan Paul is also a musician, fronting 2 bands, Big in China and Friends of the Brothers, a tribute to the Allman Brothers Band. He was also kind enough to share his original song for our opening today. Everyone, please welcome Alan Paul. Alan, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for the panel. And I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to do this with Seton Hall particularly. I've lived in Maplewood other than my time in China for the last almost 23 years, I think. And I think it's great for to do something with Seton Hall and for Seton Hall to be involved in the community in South Orange and Maplewood. It's in surrounding areas. It's wonderful. So it's such an interesting topic, and one of the benefits for me of being on this panel is that it really got me thinking about the topic and realizing that in a way it's really what I've always been striving for when I write about music and when I play music, both. And it's a through line to everything I do. I've written about music professionally a lot longer than I've played it professionally, and my desire to do it really was, I've come to realize, similar to it was all driven by a passion for sharing music that moved me. And my writing, what I've always tried to do is just capture a feeling and capture the reason that I cared about a band and what made them special to me or a performer. And when I went to China, I started performing as a musician more. And there was a special resonance to doing it there. And it was the first time I began to feel what I called the ecstasy of the evangelist, because every show I played in China was like a holy moment for me, in large part because I felt such a surge of emotion introducing American music that I care so much about to a new audience. So every time I played a song by someone like Greg Allman or Bob Dylan or B.B. King, and said their name to a Chinese audience, it was for me like uttering a blessing, because their music had meant so much to me. It's like praying, like going to church or synagogue. I'm Jewish. Something that's always been true for me in my experiences of attending musical shows, but which I didn't really think about very consciously until I had that experience of trying to spread that. Playing to an audience that largely couldn't understand the words I was singing liberated me. It made me a better, more expressive singer. It made me open up and try to really let go instead of trying to more professionally, I guess, hit the notes, so to speak. I tried to get to something deeper, hopefully based on obviously doing that. I felt that I had to invest every song I sang with the emotion that was meant to be conveyed by the lyrics. I had to have the audience understand the song, even if they couldn't understand the words I was singing. I had to, in essence, transcend language. And that forced me to think consciously about it and realize that that was what always drew me to any given music or left me cold about others. Much of my career prior to writing the books was spent at Guitar World magazine, which has been a blessing. And I am, as mentioned, a guitar player, so I love being able to write about and talk about guitar players. But there's a whole world of guitarists and musicians who are really technically wonderful and who a lot of people love that have always left me a little bit cold. And it's not that I don't respect them or their talents or their ability, but it just doesn't somehow move me. And that's always what I've been driven to. So I'm going to play, if I can figure out how to share this properly, a couple of videos for you. I'm going to start with one that's of my band, which was called the Woody Allen Band, playing a Bob Dylan song, which I had completely rearranged with my Chinese bandmates to give you a little bit of feel. And this was in a little club that was one of our favorite places to play in Beijing. So let's see if I can manage to successfully do this. Are you sharing? Okay. I just stopped the share. Did that? Oh, am I back on? Can someone give me a thumbs up that I'm back
Yeah, I
on?
gotcha.
Okay, thank you. I think I might skip the other two shares I was going to do because it's too nerve-wracking. But that gives you a little bit of a feel for what I was doing over there. And it just made me think again about that spirituality and that feeling. And the ultimate example of where I've felt that over and over in my life and in my career, as mentioned, I wrote a book, One Way Out, A History of the Allman Brothers Band, and I was able to see them probably about 100 times, and really a majority of those at the Beacon Theater in New York City. In terms of being an Allman Brothers fan, being a resident of the New York metro area is a huge advantage because they played anywhere from 8 to about 20 shows a year, almost every year from 1992, I think, until their final show in 2014 at the Beacon. And by going back to that place so many times, they really quite literally transformed it into a church. I mean, it felt like a spiritual place. And there was a bonding, and this is just the last thing I want to get at, which I felt in that little club in Beijing, and which I felt very much every time at the Beacon, is that there's a bond that goes on between the performer and the audience, which is really has to happen to have that final spiritual element. And that's what we've been missing so much in this last year where the live performances have been so limited. Although there's been a lot of great music performed in streams, and I've done a few, and I've supported many other friends and just performers I love who have done them. And it's an important part of keeping everyone's livelihoods going, and it's great that we're able to do it. It's great that we're able to have this kind of technology, but there is something inherently just missing by not being able to have the live experience, the transmission, the back and forth of energy and spirituality and feeling and emotion from the performer to the audience. So I feel blessed that I've been able to have that from both sides of the stage, and I really, really look forward to experiencing it again soon from both sides of the stage. So again, thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much, Alan. I can definitely relate. I miss live music very much too. My name's John Rabwin, and I'm our host, but I'm also one of our speakers, so I'm going next. And I don't want to dwell too long on my own introduction. I'll only tell you that I've worked here at Seton Hall University since 2001. I'm an associate professor of communication, and for the last 3 years, I've been directing our Institute for Communication and Religion. And so I'm happy to co-sponsor this event together with the Center for Catholic Studies. I'm going to share my screen right now and start a PowerPoint. Please grab a piece of paper. Oh, I can't do that. I got to share again. Sorry. While I'm starting again, please grab a piece of paper and a pen. Okay, now that you have a piece of paper and a pen, I want to begin with 2 biblical quotes and 2 artistic images. As each quote and image appears, please reflect on what it means. I'll pause for 5 seconds at each image and then read aloud. Try to jot down any idea that comes to mind. Here's the first image. My skin turns black and falls from me, and my bones burn with heat. My lyre is turned to mourning, and my pipe to the voice of those who weep. Here's our second image. But the father said to his servants, bring forth the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet, and bring hither the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found, and they began to be merry. Now his elder son was in the field, and as he came and drew nigh to the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. Thanks everyone for jotting down your ideas. The images and quotes are very rich, and we spent only a short time with them, but don't worry, I promise we're coming back to them. The title for my talk, if I can get my slide to advance. There we go. The title for my talk is the title of today's event, Spiritual Dimensions of Music, Meaning, Interpretation, and Culture. And my central message for you is that music is spiritual, and its meaning has both logical and super-rational dimensions. Instead of thinking of meaning and truth as simple, consider appreciating truth as symphonic. I'll explore these ideas with you for the next few minutes via examples of great art and music from across Western history. So let's get started. As Dr. Floyd was saying, ancient cultures regarded music as inherently spiritual, a gift from the gods. Where many arts are named after their medium, music is named in honor of divine inspiration, the Muses of ancient Greece. In the classical Greek mythos, breath is approached as inspiration, a key term with interrelated religious and biophysical meanings. The Muses were considered divine goddesses who could inspire humans. Receiving spiritual breath meant becoming filled with and even possessed by their divine talent and ideas. In Plato's Republic, artists inspired and possessed by the Muses are not necessarily a good thing. Music is powerful and works to both shape and disrupt society, so Plato considers these divine gifts and then makes so bold as to refuse some of them. Plato argues against 5 of the 7 musical modes and would ban their melodies to protect the public. He outlaws modes that engender qualities like intemperance, weak character, and indignity, leaving only 2 that articulate essential political motivations: a martial and patriotic mode for times of war, and a calm and stately mode for times of peace. I will play 2 mode clips for you now, Lydian and Phrygian. On your sheet of paper, jot down your call on which one has an inherently intemperate and sad dirge character, and which is stately and articulates peace. I'll tell you the answer after we listen, but the big question is, do either of them need to be censored and banned? Here comes Lydian. And now here's Phrygian. If you picked the first clip, Lydian, as sad and depressing, then Plato agrees, and he banned it from his ideal republic. Phrygian is the mode that was judged as stately and ordered in peace. Now, if you're like me, you only heard small differences between modes, and you would question banning either one. This exercise points toward key issues in musical perception, ambiguity of content, and the influence context and traditional cultural associations can have, even on a wise philosopher like Plato. Next, in the Judeo-Christian tradition, the Bible also treats inspiration as divine breath, plus there's an additional focus on speech in the living word of God. In Genesis, God's creative act of bringing order out of chaos is accomplished via speech, a special gift of his nature that he shares with humans. I've selected this quote from Job to share this idea. The Spirit of God has made me, and the breath of the Almighty gives me life. And then, of course, there's a picture of Adam there over on the right. Later in the New Testament, even more emphasis is placed on God's divine and living word through Jesus's incarnation. The ancient Mediterranean was primarily an oral culture, and Jesus was a speaker, not a writer. Over time, a liturgical chant tradition gradually developed and then was greatly advanced by Gregory the Great in the Middle Ages. In this music, there is a clear content, God's word as expressed in the Latin language. Here's a brief clip to give you a sense of the Gregorian chant tradition. So as we can see, in the Judeo-Christian tradition, speech and orality are more than one mode of communication among many equal options. Instead, sonic space is the primary zone where Christian meaning is made. Later on in the Middle Ages, Guido of Arezzo made a move parallel to Plato and excluded select musical intervals from worship music. Labeled Diabolus in Musica, or the devil in music, the tritone was considered to be an excessively unstable, restless, dangerous, and perverse interval that needed to be excluded from church musical practice. After this ban, the tritone only gradually became used by secular composers in the Romantic period, but by the 20th century was considered equal to all other intervals by serialist composers. Still, cultural associations are strong even today. We may not want to censor music by banning tritones, but many of us do acknowledge an ominous and supra-rational quality in this interval. In 1970, Black Sabbath used repeated tritones to launch the genre of heavy metal. I'll play a short clip for you. Please jot down one thought as you listen. So that's a really quick tour of music history. When I look at it, I see different religions and cultures interpreting music at different points in their development along an attitudinal continuum between rationalism and aesthesis. At the left pole, there are certain judgments using logical standards, and at the right-hand aesthetic pole, there's an openness to cross-pollination in engaging God and the other. The best path is to balance interpretive values, accounting for both rational objectivity and subjective feel. Pascal was a monumental mathematician, author, and theologian living in France in the 1600s. He wrote about how religious believers needed to avoid extreme interpretive attitudes. Quote, "If one subjects everything to reason, our religion will lose its mystery and its supernatural character. If one offends the principles of reason, our religion will be absurd and ridiculous. There are two equally dangerous extremes, to shut reason out and to let nothing else in." I'll briefly go over key terms representing the two poles. As I do, please try to write down roughly on the continuum where, in your judgment, you think your understanding of the four musical clips we've listened to, Phrygian, Lydian, Gregorian chant, and tritones, fits best. First, on the left, when we see art as a thing, it's objectified and completely knowable. In contrast, when we approach art and music as an event, it unfolds in our experience and from our singular perspective, so there is always an element of the mysterious and yet to be known. Where idealism on the left identifies and defines eternal absolutes, on the right, contextualism insists that arts are always situated within their histories and cultures, so they cannot be fully interpreted from outside. Next, discursive rationalism posits that language can achieve certainty. If we adopt logical principles like Aristotle's principle of non-contradiction, where something cannot be both A and not A at the same time, we can seemingly make clear distinctions even in complex areas like ethics, morals, and the arts. On the right side, interpretation abandons hyper-rational logic to open itself to aesthesis, the process of feeling, and especially in religious contexts, a special sensitivity to deeply numinous feelings of fear, awe, and supernatural majesty are expressed within both and symbolism. So, with this continuum in mind, we can return to interpreting music in our two opening examples, the parable of the prodigal son and the book of Job. So the opening example was a homecoming party. It's a secular ritual, and the prodigal son's elder brother does not know what the song or even what God means. He has to ask. And then he's too wrapped up in himself to do anything but rationally judge the music and the entire ritual as not fair. The homecoming band means betrayal and injustice to him, and he refuses to enter the party. He's outside the walls in the far back left, and his father, who in this iconography is depicted as Christ with a halo, has to go out and explain to his loyal yet judgmental and unforgiving elder son that reuniting with a brother is a blessing. The teaching doesn't seem to work. The elder brother has committed to a binary either-or interpretive attitude, and the party band's song indicates injustice to him. Now, in the Black Sabbath song lyric we listened to earlier, the ominous and powerful tritones lead into a narrative lyric where the protagonist and other scared people are running from Satan. He cries to God, "Please, God, help me." Job's song of torment and lament must sound even scarier because the devil has already caught him with God's approval. The joint cause of Job's suffering is both God and Satan, and Blake has depicted this both-and mystery in his painting by intertwining the serpent with God and giving God a cloven hoof. Eventually, Job's unwavering faith is rewarded, but can he or we truly understand God's role in suffering, warranted or not? Likewise, what is the meaning of Job's song? It's born from such an extreme level of harm and affliction that it has to be hard or even painful to listen to. Should we listen to a tortured Job cry out in song? Or should we tune him out and only listen to the party band over at the Prodigal Son's barbecue? Or only Gregori's sacred chant in the cathedral? Job does not want to be tuned out. He wants to be heard. He says, quote, "O earth, do not cover my blood. Let my outcry find no resting place." So we see that sometimes it's a real challenge to adopt an interpretive attitude that's open to encounter. One thing that can help is remembering that music is spiritual. It's an active symbolic form in shared oral space. Can we ever fully understand it, or one another, or God? Music is deeply meaningful, but this meaningful cannot be simply described in language. This is why theologians like Pascal ask us to balance rational understanding with an openness to divine mystery and the unknown. Now, I want to close out this talk with a quote from a 20th century theologian, Hans Urs von Balthasar. As we saw with Job, no one can ever fully understand God. As we saw with the prodigal son's older brother, and perhaps with Plato, when we are certain about an interpretation, we may be falling prey to personal or cultural biases. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, humans image God. If we think we fully understand a neighbor or their song, we are ignoring aspects of divine mystery they're manifesting. To balance religion's rationalism and tendency to judge and even censor, Balthasar worked on theological aesthetics, a theology that approaches God's truth with artistic terms. Here, divine truth is not seen as a logical proposition. Instead, it's a beautiful symphony. Rather than thinking we know the truth with rational faith, we should marvel at this wondrous world song with an open heart and open ears. Creation sings out with many voices, including contrast and dissonance, to form a diverse, rich, and beautifully unified whole. So here's the whole closing quote. In his revelation, God performs a symphony, and it's impossible to say which is richer, the seamless genius of his composition or the polyphonous orchestra of creation that he has prepared to play it. The purpose of its pluralism is this, not to refuse to enter into the unity that lies in God and is imparted by him, but symphonically to get in tune with one another and give allegiance to the transcendent unity, not in unison, but what is far more beautiful, in symphony. So thank you so much for listening, and I'm going to transition now out of the PowerPoint and introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is Dr. Gloria Thurmond. She's a senior faculty associate in the music program at Seton Hall University. She teaches private lessons in vocal music performance, classes in American music history, and classes for all three levels of the university core. Thurmond is the program director of the university's Jazz in the Hall concert series, which serves as a co-curricular partner with her American music history classes and provides performance opportunities for the music program's jazz and musical theater students. With an interdisciplinary background in music education, vocal music performance, and practical theology, Thurmond is a classical vocal artist and lecturer for the Assisi Performing Arts Musical Festival in Assisi, Italy, where she performs opera and sacred vocal music and more lectures on topics in music and spirituality. She's a cantor and lector at St. Joseph's Church in Maplewood, New Jersey. Dr. Thurmond, thank you for sharing with us.
Thank you, Dr. Radwan. What a presentation you gave. That really was just beautiful. Mine is going to be on a more personal level, reflecting my background as a Christian pastoral music minister, having encountered many diverse views on the topic of how various Christian religious denominations receive and interpret secular music. My perspective on that which I have seen is formed just by that, by having been a lifelong participant in music ministry in various Christian denominations. And secondly, from my perspective as a leader in lay liturgical ministry and as a professional pastoral music minister in the Roman Catholic Church for the last 25 years. With that said, by way of introduction, I therefore would like to begin with a quote by St. Pope John Paul II, who echoes a lot of what you said, Dr. Radwan. St. Pope John Paul II stated that the deep emotions that music stir up in the soul of the listener and the performer make us realize that artistic and religious experiences resemble one another. Both require a spirit of contemplation and an attitude which makes us look at reality with respect, attention, and love. The Pope went on to explain that both kinds of music, sacred and secular, or in the past referred to as profane, require a contemplative spirit. And it is clear that both kinds of music help humanity transcend itself. The arts elevate and console. They inspire and give hope. They help the human spirit rise towards God and towards the most important values in our life. That which I have discovered in my experience as a pastoral music minister is that there is no universally espoused position on the acceptance or the disavowal of the use of secular music in Christian religious denominations among pastors or members of the congregation. While this is so, I have found that there exists at least two strong positions regarding the use of secular music in religious services among church pastors. There is that position which I refer to as traditional, the traditional position, which excludes all use of secular music in religious services. This view maintains that the quality of music must be constantly tested by the biblical norm. It maintains that music must be understood within the context of the worship. Further, it must also reflect social as well as the theological history of the worshiping community. It is theology that informs the music. Secondly, it then becomes the responsibility of the pastor or the minister to teach the congregation the meaning of worship and the relationship of music to the total life of the church. It is important that the church musician and the pastor become partners in this ministry, each offering his or her own skills in the total ministry of the church. Professional musical competency is very important in this instance and is expected. Pastors who have this more conservative view of church music recognize that the music of the secular world has frequently been duplicated in the church. Only the lyrics have been changed, and that is not a new phenomenon. As you've heard, Gregorian Chant, the ancient music of the church, which is described in the Vatican's documents on the sacred liturgy as having pride of place in the contemporary church, has roots in secular melodies of the diverse cultures which comprise the Christian community under the leadership of Pope Gregory the Great during the late 6th, early 7th centuries. It is well known that Johann Sebastian Bach borrowed a melody from a German song from a ballet composed by Hans Leo Hassler and used it in his St. Matthew's Passion. It became the now famous hymn that perhaps some of you who went to church yesterday sang, "O Sacred Head Now Wounded." Later on, I believe Dr. Tram is going to speak more about that. Love songs, humorous songs, drinking songs were all adapted to religious texts throughout history. The 15th century carol, our Christmas carols, sprang from the same source as the ballads. They were both derived from medieval dance and popularized by the Franciscans, a religious order for the purpose of spreading their religious teachings. Closer to our own time, the gospel music that found its way into the African American churches during the mid-20th century had its roots in the secular music forms of blues, jazz, and rhythm and blues, all of which was referred to as devil music in religious African American homes. The conclusive view of this more traditional position of sacred music is that music should not be separated from its theological and historical foundations. When music itself becomes an end, it is believed that it fosters the goal of commercial entertainment rather than contributing to the worship of God. This position dictates that the pastor must take the leadership in the worship experience through the use of music that meets the biblical norm and serves theology as a legitimate response to God. Now, an opposite view that I would like to offer is that which I will refer to as an inclusive position in the use of secular music in religious services. This inclusive view maintains that in worship, the needs of the heart and spirit must override the goals of liturgical and theological correctness. In his response to a parishioner regarding the use of secular music in church, one pastor said the following: "Simply because the music is not explicitly Christian or religious does not mean that it is false or evil. Some music is simply a description of a particular struggle or a particular joy. Otis Redding was sitting on the dock of the bay, wasting time because he was lonely. He was describing a particularly low point in his life with this song. No, he did not give a Christian answer to the problem, but he accurately described a common problem: people suffer." This pastor further offered the following: while most popular songs, modern popular songs, are about love relationships and commonly teach that a love relationship with another human being is the answer to life, that is a wrong message. But the celebration of a loving human relationship through the use of a secular song could be desirable. He went on to observe that Martin Luther of the Protestant Reformation created one of his greatest hymns, "A Mighty Fortress is Our God," using a tune that was sung in bars, and that the Apostle Paul adopted a Greek poet-philosopher saying into his sermon found in Acts chapter 17, verse 28. The Apostle Paul also used a lot of athletic imagery in his writing, as in Philippians 3rd chapter, verses 12 through 14, indicating his familiarity with the Greek games. Being a part of the human community includes honoring that which is positive about the human community as much as decrying what is evil. We need to affirm the incredible amount of good things that are done by human beings. According to those who espouse this inclusive position, when we try to remain aloof from any and every human endeavor that is not specifically proclaiming the gospel, we will find ourselves very much divorced from the life of our community, and also very much divorced from opportunities to proclaim the truth. Building relationships requires common ground. Appreciating what is good in the arts is one platform of common ground. However, the caveat is that pastors must be careful not to be so influenced by their desire for common ground that they depart from the uncommon gospel. But with this warning, the religious community can and should learn to appreciate what is sacred in secular music. Confronted with the invitation to appreciate that which is sacred in secular music, I personally was suddenly faced with the question, how do I define and think about the term sacred? What makes something sacred? Having grown up in a household and culture where biblical stories provided the backdrop to everyday life, regardless of what might have been happening, my mind immediately went to some of those stories where sacred encounters broke through into that which seemed to be mundane at best and tragic at worst. I thought about the biblical account of Abraham and the three guests that we find in the narrative in Genesis, the 18th chapter. I thought about Hagar and Ishmael facing death in the desert, about which we can read in the 21st chapter of Genesis. And then there's the epic story of Moses and his experience and encounter with the burning bush, yet the fire did not consume the bush. And we find that particular story in the 3rd chapter of Exodus. In each of the instances that I mentioned, the sacred seems to insert its presence into the everydayness of life, the life of the individual. With Abraham, he entertains guests not knowing that they are angels, bearing news of his promised fatherhood. With Hagar, she is shown well water in the desert, thereby saving the life of her dying son Ishmael, who goes on to become the father of a great nation. And Moses, while working as a shepherd for his father-in-law, he sees a bush on fire, yet the bush is not consumed. And from that sacred encounter, Moses receives instructions that will set in motion events that will change the history of his people and of the world. Reflecting on these biblical instances of the sacred, I concluded that the sacred is characterized by a transcendent experience which inspires human beings to be able to transcend the limitations of the mundane. An encounter with transcendence, that is the sacred, will console, inspire hope and new possibilities, and elevate the human spirit. Near the end of her epic poetic novel, Aurora Leigh, the 19th century English poet Elizabeth Barrett Browning wrote the following: "Earth's crammed with heaven, and every common bush of fire with God. But only he who sees takes off his shoes. The rest sit around it and pluck blackberries." In conclusion, may I offer that with a transcendent voice from the burning bush, and with Elizabeth Barrett Browning, I would agree that all ground is sacred, and we would do well to take off our shoes. That which can make secular music sacred, therefore, is its ability to inspire us to hope and to new visions, and that which can uplift and transform our heart, mind, and our spirit toward goodwill and love for all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Thurmond. I especially appreciate your closing metaphor. I want to take off my shoes right now. Our next speaker is Dr. Jason Tram. Hailed as a conductor to watch by Symphony Magazine and filled with Italian passion by the Huffington Post, Dr. Tram's work in the operatic, symphonic, and choral realms has received critical acclaim throughout the United States and abroad. Tram currently serves as an assistant professor and director of choral activities at Seton Hall, where he was named the 2017 University Faculty Teacher of the Year. He also holds the following positions: Director of Music Ministries at the Ocean Grove Great Auditorium, Artistic Director of the Mid-Atlantic Artistic Productions, and Principal Guest Conductor of the Long Island Concert Orchestra. Pre-COVID, he was in demand as a guest conductor with important orchestral opera debuts canceled last summer in Prague, Vienna, and Italy. He is the host of Music Matters with Jason Tram, a podcast that explores artistic innovation under extreme circumstances as seen through the eyes of distinguished artists. Dr. Tram, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Radwan, and thank you, distinguished colleagues and esteemed guest speakers. It's a pleasure to hear your brilliant words and your messages, and thank you so much for this great platform to discuss this topic, which is so important. As a performing artist, this is such a conversation I've been pondering for many years. I started my musical journey as a 5-year-old, a boy soprano soloist in a small Lutheran church, and growing up a musician, I sang in church often, and I would turn around and sing Broadway and popular tunes. And this conversation between the sacred and the profane or the secular has been part of every musician's journey, and it's I think we're always having this conversation. I'm going to entitle my short lecture "Assimilation and Cross-Pollination," and this is a conversation that goes back centuries. Back to the Greeks, as our scholarly colleagues mentioned, and continues to this day. I'm going to actually sing a little bit because usually I'd be conducting these days, and I haven't conducted in front of a live ensemble in a very long time. I'm going to sing "The Passion Chorale" by J.S., which was famous from J.S. Bach's St. Matthew Passion. Before I knew that, I learned this in my church. We'd sing this most often for Good Friday, and then you see this is a hymn setting here. Bernard of Clairvaux wrote this in around the 12th century. Great text, translated to English, of course. I'll just sing you a little bit of this. It's a very familiar tune, and we mentioned that the Hans Leo Hassler wrote the tune. O sacred head now wounded, with grief and shame weighed down, now scornfully surrounded, with thorns thine only crown. O sacred head, what glory, what bliss till now was thine, yet through despised and gory, I joy to call thee mine. So this ancient melody, which goes back to the end of the Renaissance, has become the symbol of sacred music in many Christian cultures. In the Lutheran, my Lutheran church, this was a very powerful, the bar form that's represented in this hymn. It just is the symbol of Christ's suffering and our connection with that. So this piece, it may surprise you to learn that the original text to this had nothing to do with religion at all, and that perspective and time can change a piece of music. This was originally "My Heart is Enchanted by a Beautiful Maiden." It was a set of part songs written by Hans Leo Hassler for court entertainment, and it had fa-la-las in the second part. And they cut the fa-la-las out. They made the melody metrical, put it together, and they found this to be. They liked the natural minor mode. I loved Dr. Radwan's discussion of the modes. Everything changes with time and perspective. The tritone, which was the devil in music in the Middle Ages, is part of a dominant seventh chord, which is every harmony we use. That's a chord we hear in every phrase of almost every song. So that changes with time and perspective. The fact that this was a love song made for court entertainment, developing into this deeply religious and personal song, made deeper by the fact that J.S. Bach included it in his St. Matthew Passion as this unifying chorale that put together over this 2.5-hour masterwork, a pillar of the Western classical repertoire, and symbol of the Christ's suffering, has cemented it in our mind as this great piece. But its role has changed, and this has been a conversation in music that we're going to look at going back hundreds and hundreds of years. I'm going to start my journey through the musical history in the around the 1100s to the 1200s AD, a little bit of the birth of polyphony. And if you're a music major, this is usually very, very tough sailing for music majors who come to study classical music, but it's very important because up until this point, we talked about Pope Gregory, and Pope Gregory solidified and codified the chants that were used in the Roman Catholic liturgy. Up till about the 800s, the divine order in music was represented by monophonic single melody with no harmony. No instruments in church up to this point. It was one voice, and that represented the divine order. There could be more than one singer singing it. Monks might chant the chants with groups of them, but they sang in unison. When they started to add more voices, this, I'm going to posit, was an addition of the secular into the sacred. And this conversation and cross-pollination has been happening forever. What characterizes Gregorian chant is this free-flowing text rhythm. The rhythm is not consistent. It's uneven groupings of 2 plus 3, 2 plus 3, that don't have a steady recurring beat. And it perfectly represents the agogic accents of the words. Well, here, listen to this music. I'll just play a little bit of this. This is a 3-part organum with Gregorian chant as the base. So the word tenor means told in Italian. So the tenor part sings the Gregorian chant in very, very long notes. You're not even going to hear it change. But if you play it long enough, the whole chant's there. But the upper voices sing in rhythm on the top. And this is the addition of rhythm to music that's going to be so important and is derived from our sacred ancestors. Hope this works. Sorry. At least once a day in my lectures, I have to review how to get onto, there we go, YouTube. Share sound. I play Gregorian chant music to my students, and you don't tap your foot. If I tap your foot to the beat, there is no real discernible beat. That's what Gregorian chant is all about. This timeless, perfect representation of the divine order. Well, here in the 1100s and 1200s, the Notre Dame School of Polyphony started adding that extra voice, and it comes from the dance music of its time. Dun, 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 dun. That feeling comes from secular music. So, and that caught like wildfire across Europe. You may also notice that it sounds very foreign to our ears. Well, something else that changed, the perspective changes. It's like the addition of perspective to art, is you add thirds. There's no thirds and sixths except for passing. So based on the Pythagorean theorem, that the perfect intervals are fourths and fifths and octaves. So those were the only consonant notes. They didn't focus on thirds and sixths, like major chords, minor chords. That wasn't a thing yet. Harmonic progression comes from, and our ear is developing that, comes from the independent motion of individual lines over hundreds of years of experimentation. So nothing's ever locked in time. And this is especially relevant in music, as we noted with the Bach chorale. Beethoven, in his Missa Solemnis, included martial military music in the last movement of his Agnus Dei, symbolizing man's our inner fightings, our inner struggles. We see this all the time. Secular music and secular music are always in conversation. The conversation's always changing. As a performing artist myself, I make my living conducting sacred music and secular music. I love to get in front of an opera audience or a symphonic audience, and before I do, I always pray personally, because it's not about the liturgical import of that moment, but it's about moving people's hearts and souls. And I can't do that unless I'm in a place of that kind of like communing with the divine. I have to get myself there before I get in front of an ensemble which is in front of the audience. So thank you so much. I've got a closing quote from one of my favorite composers. This is Arvo Pärt, and this is I find him incredibly important. He up from 1992 to 2014, he was considered the most performed composer in the world, and he was supplanted in 2018 by John Williams of Star Wars fame. So if you don't know Arvo Pärt, look him up. He's a wonderful Estonian minimalist composer, but super famous. And he has great quotes. "I could compare my music to white light, which contains all colors. Only a prism can divide the colors and make them appear. This prism could be the spirit of the listener."
Thank you so much, Dr. Tram. That's a wonderful closing metaphor, the spirit as prism. Now it's my honor and privilege to introduce our very last panelist. I'm going in alphabetical order, so she's not last on purpose. Her name is Brooke White. Brooke is an Arizona-born and LA-based singer, songwriter, and multi-instrumentalist. She landed her big break when she was granted a golden ticket on American Idol's 7th season and she performed on the nation's biggest stage. Most people attribute White's sound to the golden era of singer-songwriters like Carole King and Joni Mitchell, and she attributes her style to both the music of the 1970s as well as country legends like George Strait, Reba McEntire, Garth Brooks, and the Judds. White released her fourth album, Calico, in October 2019. A member of the LDS Church, she resides in California with her husband and their 2 children. Brooke, thank you so much for joining us today.
Am I here? I'm here. I just realized I had to hit those 2 buttons. It's great to be here. Thank you so much. And yes, as a W, I am very used to being last, so all good. And it was such an honor to listen to everybody. Here's where I'm going to first admit to you, I didn't go to college, School of Hard Knocks, and I am far from an academic. And so my approach to this whole thing will be a little different, but I just am so thankful for all the different perspectives, which I think really lends to the subject itself, that everybody just has such a very unique perspective on how they receive and perceive and create music and art. And so I am going to do a PowerPoint presentation, which is not my usual style, but I have a tendency to wander and ramble, so I want to keep myself on task here. I'm just starting with this kind of funny slide of the 3, just if I were to, kind of narrow it down to 3 things that made me who I am today, it would be Disney, the gospel, and my parents' music. We can go ahead and tap to the next thing. This is me, older than 7 years old, but we got my great-grandma's piano when I was 7 years old. And this is her piano, my great-grandma Tootie. And when we got that piano, my dad is kind of like, can play any instrument a little bit, he just kind of has that natural sense of music in him. And I remember listening to him play and just being like totally enamored with the piano. And I remember going and sitting down at it, and it was like my fingers were like magnets to the keys. They just knew where to go. And I just started to kind of play immediately. I remember the first song that I played was Right Here Waiting for You by Richard Marx. That was like the song of the time that was popular, and it had that beautiful piano intro, and I remember playing it, and I remember my mom coming in the room and saying, "Who's playing the piano?" And she realized it was me. And that was kind of like the beginning for me of music as someone who created music. I think for me, it's one of the things that gives me like a strong belief and testimony of music's eternal significance and this like wild giant plan that God has that includes the gift of music and creation. And, it's funny, like I never realized that other people didn't just sit down and play this way. Like at the time, I didn't think it was unique or different. I just knew that I heard it, I felt it, and I played it. To this day, like I said, I told you I'm not very academic. I don't read music. I play by ear. And like for me, it's when I sit down to play, it's like recalling something I already knew. Like this is something I've been working on spiritually for eons, forever as long as I've been around. And so it's very powerful for me. And I would say potentially the most spiritual thing I do is to make music and to share it with people. It drives me. I feel very inadequate also in it. And so it's very humbling, and it does cause me to rely so much on the Spirit to kind of like really keep doing it. And I'll also say I didn't start singing and songwriting until my late teens and my early 20s. I didn't even start singing until my late teens. We can go ahead and click to the next slide, Burke. Thank you. I grew up in a very musical family. And I don't mean like the Von Trapps where we like all sang together and we wore matching dresses out of curtains, but we really enjoyed music so freaking much. We weren't like, we had a small piece of crap TV that didn't work very well, but we had a lot of music that played. We would go on drives as a family just to listen to music. And my parents were super passionate about their music collection and their records. We had an old beat up jukebox in our backyard, and we would jump on the trampoline and listen to my parents' records. And this totally shaped me musically. I really kind of complained about it in my teens and wanted to listen to Ace of Base and, Boys to Men. But I'm so thankful that I was steeped in the Bee Gees and Marvin Gaye and the Carpenters and James Taylor and Fleetwood Mac. So that's a huge part of my brain. We can go to the next one. The next part is my faith, which is a huge, I told you in my first slide, I was born and raised in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. If you've never heard of that long title, it's the long title for Mormon, as many people know us. We're trying to get farther away from that title and let people know, yes, we believe in Jesus very much. And so this is a huge part of my life. Cannot talk about my life, my music, my upbringing without the gospel and how it influenced me. Okay, move next. So when it comes to music, John, I think you said something about this kind of looking at things in a very kind of either or binary way. And I would say, and I know this is probably common to many faiths, but for us, when it comes to decision making, it's very much does it invite the Spirit or does it drive it away? And it's kind of in a very, I've come to find a very simplified way of trying to decide whether you should or shouldn't do something, partake of something, make something, do something. And when we're 8 years old, we get baptized. We feel like that is the age that you can make a decision more consciously or intentionally. And we get these little rings, and it has these 3 little letters in it, CTR, which is short for choose the right. We are thinking about good decision making from a very young age, and it is just drilled into us. You want to make good choices that invite the Spirit and not drive it away. And that very much applies to the music that you choose when we're taught this. So moving on. When you're a teenager, you are in our church. Again, we are talking so much about our decisions and the way that we live our lives. And we're very much guided by the commandments and a lot of guidelines to try to help us avoid certain pitfalls and making certain mistakes that would maybe cause a lot of pain and consequences, right? And so we have this pamphlet that kind of guides our youth to help us make these decisions. And I just took a little piece out from the section about music and dancing. And I'm just going to read. It says, music can enrich your life. It can edify and inspire you and help you draw closer to Heavenly Father. Music has a profound effect on your mind, spirit, and behavior. Choose carefully the music you listen to. Pay attention to how you feel when you are listening. Some music can carry evil and destructive messages. Do not listen to music that encourages immorality or glorifies violence through its lyrics, beat, or intensity. Do not listen to music that uses vulgar or offensive language or promotes evil practices. Such music can dull your spiritual sensitivity. This is a pretty strong message that was sent to me in my youth. And I will be honest, it really stuck with me. And I started hearing music in this, is it good? Is it not good? Kind of a way, like you said, that more binary way. But also being a very sensitive person, I identify as an HSP, highly sensitive person. And I feel like I have a lot of sensitivity to the human experience on a lot of levels. So I've always been kind of drawn in by messages where it felt like, well, where does this fit in? Is this good? Is it bad? What is it? Okay, so next message. I wanted to bring in Rick Rubin here. So Rick Rubin's not a Mormon, but he's a very interesting producer and kind of a mysterious guy. And I don't know if anybody's watched the documentary that he recently aired on Showtime, but it's a 4-part document series. And he says, Rick Rubin said, it's always been the love of music and the love of that feeling of hearing something and it taking me away. I've never been into drugs or drinking or anything. And I feel like music has always been sort of my, that's what's altered my consciousness. It takes me out of myself and it touches me in a way. It's like you can't even put into words. And when I saw Rick say this, man, I related to him. Also, being a member of the LDS faith, we have the word of wisdom. We don't drink. We don't do drugs. I mean, we're heavily discouraged against it. And so, yeah, for me, I could say the way I alter my consciousness 100% is through music, and that it's so powerful and it has the ability to do that. Kind of like my Strength of Youth pamphlet says, it's so powerful. Okay, next slide. So that leads us to my American Idol audition. I was going to show a clip, but I just couldn't. It makes me cringe so much. But see, it's such a long story, but I ended up auditioning in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, flew all the way from California. It's way too long of a story, but let's just say I'm here in front of the judges. They ask me, tell us something interesting about you. They edit it. They already know this about me because of the preliminary process, but I tell them that I've never had a drink and I've never seen a rated R movie. Again, cue Strength of Youth pamphlet. That was like a thing. Watching rated R movies, it was just as kind of like black and white with the things we watched. And that was like a huge kind of thing to say. I found later, like this was such a weird thing that I had just shared with the world. And Simon, he responded quickly with, well, we'll bring you to the dark side. And I quickly responded with like, I dare you. I don't know. Anyway, it was a really interesting thing to then see the response of so many people when I just merely told them I hadn't seen a rated R movie or drank. So that leads us to the next point. Here I am on the show. As soon as I had mentioned this aspect of who I was as a person and parts of like my decisions and the way I lived my life, my lifestyle, people started wanting to sniff out like, well, who is this what are you like? Why do you make these choices? Why are you doing this? And I think people of religious faiths, the Christian community all over the place really wondered if I was a Christian. And immediately people from my faith and Christian communities I had tons of praise, but I also had a lot of judgment. I had a lot of pressure. Will you please be an example for my kids? Will you please, like, just this pressure, like, please be this example. Like, make sure you choose songs that are appropriate and wear clothing that's, you know, that's modest and not too showy. That pressure became something that I felt very strongly, and I didn't, like, it was a part of who I was as a person to make these decisions, but then to be put under the fine microscope was very stressful as an artist and as a person, and it really deeply affected my art. Okay, next one. So the question, and forgive me for going to get to this question, but when we had our little walkthrough, John, you said, can I be a person of faith and be successful in the music business? Is it possible to be a spiritual being in the marketplace? And I'm sure we might talk more about this, but one of the things I discovered after my idol journey and where I started was with this whole like little weird factoid about my lifestyle, the choices I make. It really started to be like, okay, how do I maintain this in this industry? How do I remain relevant? How does this dictate the music that I make? The pressure I felt to be an example. And, you know, I knew I wasn't going to make church music. I felt more inclined towards secular mainstream music. And I felt like those icons are so funny. It's different than the emoji, but whatever. I definitely struggled, and I felt like there was such a narrow space for me to create in. As I was trying to relate to my human experiences and like, how do I talk about it in not such an idealistic way, but in an honest way, but that also honors like who I am and God. So next quote. So for me, this is kind of like, I just quickly found something that showed what I've done with my music career. I have actually made 12 albums from 2005 till now. That's actually a lot of albums, EPs and albums. The truth is I love to make music. Have I been extremely successful in the marketplace? Meh. You know, it all depends on how you define success. And that has always been a real struggle for me. And I know as many of us on here as artists and performers, we always struggle with that question of success and how successful can I be? And I think I've always been left kind of thinking, of course, there's so much more success out there that I could have been. And I wondered, is it possible for someone like me that wants to retain this sort of identity in my faith, but also a deep passion for music and doing both? I'm going to be honest, it's been very difficult for me. But I've made lots of music and I've enjoyed it. So that's successful-ish. Next one, we're almost there. Sorry. I just listened to an amazing podcast with Brandon Flowers, who also happens to be a member of my faith. He is, if you didn't know, the lead singer of The Killers, an extremely successful rock band. He happens to show you that it is possible, okay? He said, directly in his interview last night. It was really amazing. He said, the question was, someone looking for advice as a faith-based person that is looking to get into rock and roll. He says it can be done. Once you commit, once I've committed to that path that I was going to take, and he mentioned it was difficult at first, he kind of fell off his path, but it made him a lot easier than when he was wishy-washy. And there's something to be said for that. And that doesn't mean that he can't write something profound and do some and make something great. And I was just so thankful that he said that. Like, I feel like I know this, but to see someone at that level be like, I'm committed to this life, you know, this faith, and I'm gonna make like some kick-a rock and roll. So that was cool. Next one. Okay, here I am now. I'm a mom. Yay. I have kids now. That's a whole new level that affects me as a musician, as a person who perceives and makes music. And yeah, once you have kids in the room, in the car, in your house, you're watching what's being said. You're watching what they're listening to, what they're paying attention to. So let's get to the next one. One thing that I do that I have a great passion for is playlisting. I'm as passionate of a music listener as I am a music maker, thanks to my childhood. And I'm really hell bent on finding music that is so good, that does share elements of the human experience on a wider scale, but isn't just so explicit all the time. And so I make these monthly playlists, and a lot of my audience are moms like me with kids in the car, and people that, yeah, are of faith and probably have a similar mindset. So we'll click to the next one. What I want to tell you about that is that when I make these playlists, it takes me an extensive amount of time, because I'm going to show you, here's just a sampling of the top 50 songs in the USA. Right now I have a feature where it blocks out all explicit songs, so I can just automatically see what is explicit and what's not. And that's just based on like their standards of explicit. As you look at it, 15 out of 50 songs are not tagged explicit. Okay, so I'm going to completely agree with so many people here and say that there is some sacred ground to all the different ways we express ourselves in the human experience. But as a mom, as a person with little children and little ears, and as a human being with probably certain faith and value system, it's hard. Like, I feel like it is getting so hard to say, is it okay? Can you be relevant? Can you be good? Can you be successful? Can you talk about legit, real stuff, but not have the explicit? My mom, whenever she saw the E in the beginning, she thought that meant for everyone. Bless her heart. She went to listen to a song, discovered it was not. So it's like, it's very interesting to be at this place and realize how difficult it is to find music that isn't explicit. And we can think about context and time and place to listen to this music, but it's an interesting thing to observe how much of it in our time is at the explicit level. That's like what we're listening to mostly. So to wrap this up, next one is, how does it make me feel? I think that's the question I just go back to. And for me, as I get older, as I get deeper into, you know, more experiences with people and more into music, the more I realize that, yeah, it's, you know, is music and creation and all of this as binary or black and white as they've made it to be? I mean, no, it's much more nuanced than that. And it's what makes it challenging and hard, but it also makes it interesting. And I'm thankful. I'm just thankful for music. I'm thankful for just how spiritual it is for me. I had this thought that, you know, we are both spirits having a human experience, and we're humans having a spiritual experience. And so there's, you know, humanity is God's business, and that's what secular music, whatever it is, it's still spiritual. It's us just talking about being a human, and there's so much incredible purpose in that and power on a billion levels, and there's just not enough time to talk about it. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brooke. I especially appreciated your gratitude theme as your closing, and I want to extend that to all of our panelists. As we transition into our next part of our session, It's looking like we have about 20 minutes left, so I'll try to split it roughly in half. We'll do panel Q&A for about 10 minutes, and then we'll do a little bit of audience Q&A for about 10 minutes. So, panelists, I asked you to, of course, listen and pay attention as our speakers shared their perspectives on secular music and spirituality. Who would like to volunteer to go first and ask a question of somebody else on our panel?
I have a question. I have a question for Gloria.
Great, thank you, Alan.
And it sort of relates back to what we were what she just finished with there. You had referenced how some of the trying to think of the word, the dichotomy between religious music and secular music, which was sometimes called the devil's music.
Yes.
And as somebody who's written a lot about blues, I'm of course very familiar with that. And you know, artists like Sam Cooke and Aretha Franklin, who came out of a church background and then, of course, recorded so much of the great secular music we know. You know, we're often got a lot of hassle for that. And I'm wondering, but for most of us who weren't in that tradition, I think could feel the spirit in their secular music as well. And Ray Charles, I mean, they brought that holy music feeling to secular music. I'm wondering if you think that's still something people talk about or worry about, or is that something in the past?
I do think that it may be something that is relegated to the past, but as you said, it really was a firestorm. Back then in the 1950s with someone like Sam Cooke and Ray Charles. Oh, I mean, you know, they were just ready for the divine fire to fall from the sky and consume him, you know, in terms of taking his piece. I believe it was I Got a Woman with Crosstown. Well, they were so outraged with that because, again, it came right out of the church, rolled right out of a piece that was I believe it was entitled, There's a Man Going Round Taking Names. You know, he took my mother's name and it's not been the same. So it's about a response to death, you know, one of those old religious songs from the church. But what they did was they brought that divine fire. You're absolutely right. They brought that divine fire right into that R&B. But it was not, certainly was not appreciated back then, particularly by the religious, very religious African-American households. Today, I don't think that, well, for maybe not so much musical reasons, but in the African-American community, as I think in most of our American communities, church attendance is so way down. It's way down, maybe what was maybe 60% to maybe 75%. 30 to 50 years ago. Today it's down, I believe, to about 40%. So the fact that we have fewer people who are in church and in that community, and also I think that the musical styling has changed. Gospel, it's not so much a prevalence of gospel music today, but I believe that it's more of what maybe even 10 years ago, maybe it's changed even now, something that was called the contemporary Christian sound. It's more of a commercial sound, it's more popular. So even gospel music as music of witness, of personal witness, that's driven, you know, by the impulses, the musical impulses of jazz and blues and R&B, that's old, that's pretty much old school now. And again, it might be, again, something about which an older population would care, but the young people, those who are still there, who might find reason to, you know, they still find that it's valuable to be there. The musical culture is, I believe, very different. And I say that only on hearsay, in that I've not been in that community for a long, long while. My particular activity is now very much in the Roman Catholic Church, but even there, and they are picking up gospel music there. They're picking up what was maybe popular in many of the African American churches, maybe 40 to 50 years ago. But in terms of the dialogue that's happening about secular music in the African American church, it's said there, we have a different kind of a population. Gospel music is sort of no longer really on the table in terms of the popular music of that church. I do know that when, it's been, again, my dates are off. I've not been there for so long. But when hip hop became something that was more mainstream, hip hop was used, again, it was allowed in some of the churches, provided it was about Jesus. They used the style. And again, the effort was, how do we keep the young people in church? Well, let's kind of meet them halfway. So there were hip hop groups that were brought in, but it was all about the gospel message, of Jesus Christ. So, but I don't know if that answers your question, Mr. Allen, but, it's, I don't think that there's a relevancy much anymore in terms of, it was something new back then. In other words, to roll out of the bars on Saturday night and into church on Sunday morning, and which is really literally, I think, how it happened with Thomas Dorsey, blues musician. He was literally playing R&B, and then there was family tragedy, from what I can recall of the story. He lost his daughter, young daughter died, and he had a conversion experience and began to take that music into church, that style into the church, in the place of the R&B that he felt that he could no longer just sort of stay there, but he needed to go for the consolation that would be offered by the church. I see Dr. Tram has something to say, so maybe he can help me out here a little bit.
I always find it interesting to see how the musicians often freely cross the border between the two. You mentioned that a lot of the players who play that music were making blues music one night, then they go into church and they're making church music the next day. I find that common in classical music and in pop's music and in Broadway, that people aren't necessarily one or the other. We're all complex, and we find the divine in both, I believe. I know very religious people who make opera, and very secular people who also work in churches too. So it's this kind of both sides of the coin, and I think musicians have always freely crossed those borders.
Right, but I think though the reaction of the congregation, I think that's more of what was being asked about. And today I don't think it's as relevant because again, there's a different culture in terms of the fact that the culture has very much abandoned, as a culture. They have the church culture. The going to church is something that has been greatly diminished over the years. It's down about 40%. The last statistic that I saw, 40% within a matter of maybe 25 years.
Well, thank you, Dr. Thurmond. Can we try to get one more quick question between panelists? Dr. Floyd.
Yeah, thanks. I guess this is for a few people. So maybe for Jason and Mrs. White, Brooke, I'm wondering about so the market, right? So we're talking about secular and sacred at their best forms, and in reality, both are now in so many ways reduced by what will sell or what will keep people in the pews. And so I'm wondering, I was brought back to an experience I had when I was in grad school in Boston, and I went to hear The Messiah, Handel's great religious piece, and they had these 4 soloists. It was all done in a small group, piece instruments, gorgeous, and the soprano hit this note and you're just like transported. And I get out of my moment of revelry and turn, and there's this kid like asleep next to me, could not have been more bored and like just totally not wanting to be there. And I thought, like, we've had the exact same sensory experience and yet drawn such different sort of conclusions from it. You're literally asleep and I'm like moved to tears. So I guess in different ways for each of you, I wonder, like, what role does education, in quotes, in a very sort of general sense, it doesn't have to be formal, but how do you have to be like prepared to see the sacred in the secular, or even in the sacred in that case? Because sometimes I think we talk like, oh, if you just are there, it'll hit you. But in reality, that's not the case for a lot of people. And I think, but yet there are, at the same time, people can be sort of formed, trained, educated, have experiences that dispose them to suddenly see things that they wouldn't have seen before in the same music. So how do we think about that? You know, how do you have to prepare yourself to really take in music more fruitfully, more fully?
I'll go first, and then Brooke can talk about the contemporary. I'll talk about the sacred a bit. With something like an oratorio, like the Messiah, that's a 3-hour opera minus the sets and costumes. Mm-hmm. The oratorio comes from the opera, and the Vatican said there will be no opera during Lent, and the Italian audiences love their opera, so they did a workaround. So they said, let's hire the same singers and musicians. We'll take away the sets and costumes, and now we've got an opera for Lent. So they did the same arias, the same solos, the same choruses, but they went a different direction. So now we have this this new form of the oratorio. So to understand that, it helps that it's in English, right? That being the language of the vernacular, understanding what it's about. That's the most important thing, and understanding the narrative, what the piece is about. It's much easier to understand like a pop song that students know. That they recognize, and I teach them that it's like looking at a great painting. If you look at a great painting the first time, you may make an impression, it may not, but every time you look at it afterwards, you notice details, nuances that as you engage with the Messiah a year from now, 10 years from now, 30 years from now, it's a totally different piece and it speaks to you differently. And art music's like that. There's a depth, and I teach my undergraduates that is to find that depth, to find what makes it tick. Sometimes it doesn't happen first time. Sometimes it takes more engagement. Mm-hmm. I also know that a lot of contemporary music is made to be immediately consumed and immediately appreciated. Dance music, feel that beat, move to that beat. Rock music, but even in great art, I'm a huge fan of rock and roll. In great rock and roll, there's layers too, but there's different layers in all music. I'm a huge lover of rock and roll and stuff, but it's understanding, and I always tell my students, if you're going to see like a ballet or an opera, know what it's about first. Do your reading, read the program notes. It gives you some guideposts to sit there and, it'll make the experience better. That's my brief.
Great.
Thank you.
This one's really hard for me because I think when you try to become viable to as many people as possible, you're chasing your tail. What, and it's very difficult because it all depends on who's receiving it and where they're coming from. Like it's like some people prefer a McDonald's hamburger and that's like their world. It's like, that's so good. But it had yet to go to like some crazy hamburger place. It's like the most epic hamburgers. Like, it's just, it's all depending on like where you're coming from. And that's what's so interesting to me, that as I get older, that's what is so nuanced about feeling the spirit. It is all very dependent on how you've been, for lack of a better word, conditioned to understand and feel that spirit, and what you've been surrounded with, and what your culture has taught you, and what it has shown you, and what you've been exposed to. And I want to bring back what Ray said during his, is the intention. I think that's such an incredibly important word when it comes to both creating and receiving, is what's your intention for this? Like, what do you want to get out of this? Like, what, if you come, maybe you came to that thing, to the Messiah, because your mom made you. You didn't want to go. So yeah, you're snoozing because it's like, this is outside of your realm. You're not to this level spiritually yet. You're not mature enough to handle such a deep spiritual experience. But like, there's something else that's just more catered to his level or to their level at this point. And so it's just not, what's beautiful about music and about the spirit is it's not one size fits all. It meets us often where we are. Now, I totally agree that education and culture and more opportunities to experience more will lend to a more cultured palate. It will help you appreciate things that you would have never ever, like, beyond what you could have ever imagined existed in this world. And it's both, it's so awesome that it works this way, that God's like, no matter where you are, I can hopefully reach you somewhere, like that there's something for you out there. And what works, for Gregory and the high note during the Messiah, and what works for like a 13-year-old, whatever that he's listening to, it's like there's something there for everyone. And yeah, I think it's getting harder. Like I said, with the top 50, you see that so much of it is of the more explicit nature. And it, for me, again, given my conditioning and my upbringing, it's harder for me to pull out some of the, like, really the intent that's pointing towards God in that. But you know, it's an interesting time. I think it would be good for us maybe as a society to prioritize the opportunity for younger people to become more educated, to become more cultured, to expand beyond the TikTok universe. I mean, there's a lot there. Again, TikTok isn't just one thing, but you know, it would be interesting for us to give youth and people much more to choose from, because they only can go off of what they have to choose from, what is available to them and in their sphere. That's what I think.
Thank you so much, Brooke. We got 5 minutes left, and so I'm going to transition into audience Q&A. And my friend Mark Anthony Datz has asked several questions, so I'm going to use my bias and pick only one. And then, since it refers to Greek mythology, I'm going to hope that Dr. Floyd can add extra details as I try to answer it. So Mark Anthony Datz asks about muses versus sirens. The muses produced pleasurable sound, and sirens sound that you had to block out. Why did that mythology of two different sound makers develop? Why was the sound of the sirens restricted? Why did the sounds of the muses become music? And when I think about this very interesting question, Mark, it's mostly I think of the muses as working through humanity. And so you hear an inspired artist, and they've been inspired by a particular muse, and the different arts had different muses. So there's 9 of them. There's one for epic poetry, and there's one for music, and there's one for history, and so on. And so it's like leading to human production. And then when I think about the sirens, at least with the myth of Ulysses, I think it's kind of more like a direct access to a sound, a attractive sound that is a threat for the sailors, right? So the blocking is a survival tactic. And with Plato censoring artists, I think it's maybe less of a survival tactic and more about a moral concern for the formative role of music on the people in the Republic, that if they learn to work in a style that is weak and intemperate by whistling songs that are weak and intemperate, then they'll bring that with them throughout public life. So I think it's a little bit different. The sirens are more like a direct threat and life or death, and the muses are inspiring humans, and that's creating more of a cultural pattern that Plato is worried about, and so he works to censor artists. Greg, did you have anything wise to add on Platonic and Greek mythology?
I'll say one thing very quickly. It struck me that as we've all talked, we've focused, as does Plato, almost exclusively on lyrical songs, so songs that are music and words, and that adds like a complexity to how we evaluate them. And as I was preparing my comments for today, I noticed Plato makes a statement in the text I was looking at that he does elsewhere, where he says language is a drug, and there's this ambiguity that it can be an antidote or it can be a poison. And so I think that too, Mark, just to validate your observation, speaks to the sense that, and even Brooke's concern with the top 50, right? We can look at songs that move us in a way prior to looking at their words. And then we look at the lyrics and think, well, is this a worldview? Is this an idea? Is this a perspective that I agree with? Is it antithetical to what I believe? Or is it perhaps just a valid expression of a human emotion I'm not interested in indulging right now in myself, right? So how do we sort of go between, in a way, the muses and the sirens, I think, are often sort of intertwined in the music we sort of listen to and receive, and require that sort of ongoing reflection on, well, what do I mean by music? Is there a lyrical, the norm of the gospel, as Gloria said, is there a standard for thinking about lyrics that are explicit or hateful? This was going to be my question for John. You know, we want to keep this culture of encounter, but we all think there are lines in the sand somewhere beyond which a piece of music has lyrics or an intent that is grotesque or evil or criminal. And so where do we draw those? Are there far enough ones that we all agree on? Are there really too restrictive ones that we all agree shouldn't be as restrictive as they are? It gets messy. So that's the best I can do.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Floyd. We can end on the messiness of human communication and art, that drawing clear lines might need to be done with a family, as Brooke was describing, but for adults in a pluralistic society like our own, I hope we could get into the mess and find out through a culture of encounter. This brings us to our closing. Thank you to all our guests. This was a wonderful panel. We had many questions from our audience members registration, and then a few more at the chat that we did not get to. We do hope to be able to do some follow-ups, and so please stay tuned to the Institute for Communication and Religion website. Hopefully next semester we'll be able to engage more of these questions. On behalf of the Institute for Communication and Religion and our co-sponsor, the Center for Catholic Studies at Seton Hall University, thank you all for tuning in. Have a wonderful evening.